Win big in 2024 with Team Sync from RotoBaller. Import your fantasy teams and sync your leagues. Get customized tools and tailored advice for your specific rosters and scoring settings, including live recommendations from the Live Draft Assistant, Free Agent Finder, and Lineup Optimizer. Sync an unlimited amount of NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL fantasy teams from all of the major fantasy platforms. Get a discount for any premium pass using my promo code KNUCKLER, KNUCKLER. Just visit rotoballer.com/radio and start rotoballing like a boss. And folks, get the MLB Premium Pass. The fantasy baseball season is fast approaching with spring training kicking off. This podcast is also brought to you by Parlay Play Fantasy Sports. Use my referral link and my referral code RotoBrady. Get that sweet, sweet deposit bonus. They got paid contests, free contest, player prop parlay contest coming to a state near you. Check it out. It's a fun and unique platform. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you episode 125 of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast, Tap That. And we are looking forward to UFC Fight Night Mexico City this weekend.
Break out the red panties.
And, Alexander Volkanovski got knocked out. Robert Whittaker came out on top of Paulo Costa. It ended up being a losing night for me on Saturday just because I wagered more proportionally on Volkanovski I think it was like minus 120, minus 125. Otherwise, came rather close. It was a fun card last week for sure. This week, folks, in MMA, we've got Cage Warriors. We've got LFA. We've got Ryzen Landmark 8 late in or early into Saturday morning, right after Friday night, going down in Asia. Check that out on Ryzen.live or Ryzen.tv. It's not going to be on Triller this time. We got in boxing the Santiago versus Nakatani card. We've got KSW. We've got PFL versus Bellator in Saudi Arabia Saturday at noon, and a handful of other UFC Fight Pass events, including Uriah Faber's A1 Combat, Fusion FC, Karate Combat. Folks, I'm trying to make as many picks as I possibly can this week. You can find all my picks for all of these kinds of UFC Fight Pass, major regional promotions, major boxing events at RotoBrady on Twitter. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify. Like, comment, subscribe, leave favorable reviews, and tell your friends. I will be in the RotoBaller MMA Discord from 4 to 5 p.m. at 4 5 p.m. onward throughout the night. Doing the weekly DFS sports betting Q&A. Show up. Let's talk about UFC Mexico City. And let's see, we got some other interlude episodes, by the way, in the works, especially as we approach spring football season. And so I'm going to be, I'm making picks for a lot of things this week. This is a huge week in MMA. I really, as good as UFC Mexico City is, I think just from an interest point in the sport, PFL versus Bellator is the card that is getting my attention the most this week. If you're an MMA fan, from Thursday night to Sunday is going to be lit up with fantastic action. We got 13 fights on the UFC Mexico City card. Starting off at featherweight, Muhammad Naimov against Eric Silva. A flyweight matchup between Victor Altamirano and Felipe dos Santos. Another flyweight matchup between Luis Rodriguez and Dennis Bondar. By the way, Altamirano, Rodriguez are of Mexican descent, and they're fighting in Mexico City. I will point that out moving forward because it's going to be important. Claudio Puelles against Fares Zaim at lightweight. Another flyweight contest between Mexico's Edgar Chairez and Daniel Lacerda. They're running it back. Jesus Aguilar versus Mateus Mendonca at flyweight. Bantamweight, Mexico's Christian Quinones against Rayoni Barcelos. Lightweight, Mexico's Manuel Torres against Chris Duncan, the 11-1 professional out of Scotland. I think that's their flag. It's hard to identify just by flag. I'm pretty sure that is Scotland's flag, though. Strawweight, Mexico's Yasmin Uruguay against Sam Hughes. Bantamweight, Raul Rosas Jr. against Ricky Tercios. in what's a great test for Raul Rosas Jr. And, for a guy like Ricky Tercios, has to be a very highly motivated matchup. Lightweight, Mexico's Daniel Zellhuber against Francisco Prado. The co-main event, running it back, Yair Rodriguez of Mexico fighting Brian T. City Ortega. And the main event at flyweight, Brandon Moreno against Brandon Royval.
Break out the red panties.
13 fights. A lot to talk about here. Let us start off at the bottom of the card with Muhammad Naimov versus Eric Silva. Naimov is a heavy favorite in this one. And I didn't think I'd have to scroll down so far. Minus 575. Eric Silva, the plus 425 underdog. I think Naimov is going to be popular in every single way this weekend, DFS and the like. I'm seeing Naimov, especially from my boy Blood Money MMA bets, utilized in a lot of parlays. Let's talk about Eric Silva first as a result. Got a Contender Series win by first-round knockout over Anvar Boynazarov. Just lost by third-round arm triangle choke to TJ Brown back in December of 2022. Hasn't had a UFC fight since then. Naimov lost in the Contender Series to Colin Anglin by unanimous decision. Got outstruck 88-52 and taken down 3 times. But then he's, got 2 straight victories against the likes of Jamie Malarkey by second-round knockout and a unanimous decision victory against Nathaniel Wood, who he took down 4 times. The thing about it, those are 2 really high-quality wins for Naimov. Eric Silva, I would have, you'd like to see. I think you got to be able to beat the TJ Browns of the world. I just think, especially with so much time passed since Eric Silva's last UFC fight and last UFC win, by the way, which is August of 2022, if you count the Contender Series, Muhammad Naimov has rattled off 2 very impressive wins in a row against very respectable competition. I think that at minus 575, and I think with the mixture of possibilities that this fight could be put away in, I think that, I don't think Naimov by decision or by inside the distance is crazy. But honestly, play him in DFS, use him as a piece to string together some parlays. If I had to pick a prop, I don't know. I would maybe go Naimov inside the distance, minus 138. But I think that there's too many possibilities about how this fight plays out. I think that there's a safer way to use that minus 575. Next up, we got Victor Altamirano against Felipe Dos Santos. Felipe Dos Santos, heavy favorite, minus 298. Altamirano, the plus 240 underdog. Let's start with Felipe Dos Santos. Lost in his UFC debut to one Manel Kopp. Got outstruck 112-99, knocked down ones. It was a fight that ended up being closer statistically than it really was as it played out. Kopp got the better of him in every round, really. But, it was a respectable performance by Dos Santos. I just wonder how much of that is because, is it possible that Manel Kopp was not taking Felipe Dos Santos as seriously because that was a late replacement fight, and because Manel Kopp was, doing his star boy thing. So I do wonder that about Felipe Dos Santos. Victor Altamirano. It's hard to hold a lot of, his last UFC loss was to Tim Elliott by unanimous decision, and he at least didn't let Tim get too many strikes off, but he did get taken down 6 times. Altamirano beat Vinicius Salvador by unanimous decision his last time out, 62-47 in the striking, 3-1 in the takedowns. It's just that's a lot of credit to give Felipe Dos Santos for, a fight against Starboy in, short circumstances. He's 23 years old. He's had a very short pro career to this point. I mean, he only had one fight in LFA after, his fight in Brazilian Fighting Series. And he was fighting people with, 5-2, 2-2, 5-0, 6-1 records, before that. Altamirano, a little bit more of a seasoned vet when it comes to the UFC. He's 33 years old. That's an experience difference, but it's the experience difference going all the way back to the fact that Altamirano's whole professional career was spent in LFA. I think both these guys might be good at DFS numbers. Because, like, I think Dos Santos has the higher ceiling in this fight to land a really high volume of strikes. But Altamirano, I think, is going to be a really low price. If you can get him in the $11 to $13 range or $10 to $13, I think that that's possible, and I think that that's fantastic. And by the way, I think Naimov beats I forgot to give the number. I think Naimov beats Eric Silva like 85, 90 times out of 100. And on this point, I think Altamirano at least wins this fight 40 to 45 times out of 100, at least if you're really believing in Felipe Dos Santos. So I think I have to say, give me Altamirano on the money line plus 240. Hit it! And, how that happens, it's just too hard to say, like, outcome-wise. Dos Santos' first pro loss was to Manel Kape. And so I don't really know if I feel all too comfortable calling a prop on that one because of the difference in experience between these two. If I had to say, Altamirano maybe by decision if you really want to, be risky on that end. Dos Santos, I don't know. I think this fight probably goes the distance. I think that if you're looking for that, the fight going to decision is minus 205. That makes sense. Altamirano by decision, plus 460. Santos by decision, minus 107. Those are both fine. I think that's as comfortable as I'm going to be there. But the fight goes the distance. I think that could string together something in parlay form. Next up, we got a flyweight matchup again between Dennis Bondar and Luis Rodriguez. Dennis Bondar is the plus 102 underdog. Rodriguez, the minus 122 favorite. Let's start off with Dennis Bondar, loser of both of his UFC fights, February of 2022 and June of 2023 against Malcolm Gordon by first round knockout and unanimous decision loss to Carlos Hernandez. Rodriguez lost his Contender Series fight against one Jerome Rivera. A Jerome Rivera who went on to lose 4 straight fights in the flyweight division in pretty bad fashion. Like, he got finished in 3 of them. He got handled in the other, through the course of 3 rounds. Jerome Rivera was one of those guys that I used as a real, test to see, if you can't beat Jerome Rivera, you can't hang around in the UFC. That I genuinely believe. He's one of those guys that it's like, you just don't take any fights against him seriously. Like, KB Billar was another example of that. Bondar, questionable impressiveness coming into the UFC, but it has been, 2 tough fights to start off. I do also believe that Rodriguez, he's won, 5 straight fights in Lux Fight League since he took that loss to Jerome Rivera. So I could at least see this is like a 50-50 fight to me, but the odds sort of reflect that, and they give the edge, I think, to the guy with the more question marks and the higher ceiling in Rodriguez. I don't know, man. I think that either one of these guys, plus 102, I'm comfortable with that, and minus 122, I'm pretty comfortable with that. I think if you go Bondar, I don't know. I think you still have to go inside the distance because he has never won a fight in his professional career by decision. They've all been, it's been 4 knockouts, 13 submissions, I believe. So, I don't know. Bondar inside the distance, plus 400, that's all right. Otherwise, if I had to pick one of these guys, I guess I have to go Bondar. I think he bounces back from, 2 straight tough UFC fights. Because all I've seen is Rodriguez lose to as low level of a UFC fighter as we have seen. So I guess Bondar plus 102. And at this close of a fight, I'm going to stick with, picking a straight up winner. Next up, by the way, Dennis Bondar is nicknamed Psycho. I think that's a 50-50 fight, but God, that's intriguing from the circumstances of, Rodriguez bouncing back with 5 straight wins at a lower level after a loss to a really bad, UFC flyweight. And then Bondar, a guy who's had to face 2 really tough UFC fighters in his first 2 UFC fights. At lightweight, Claudio Puelles against Fares Zayem. Zayem, the -198 favorite. Puelles, the +164 underdog. Let's start off with Fares Zayem. Winner of 4 of his last 5 fights dating back to October of 2020. And has a really good, his only loss in that stretch of time is by first-round rear naked choke to Terrence McKinney. The other 4 wins that he's had against Jamie Malarkey, Luigi Vendramini, both by decision, and then 2 straight decision wins over Michael Fieglock, 60 strikes to Fieglock's 28 and 3 takedowns to 1, and then over Jai Herbert, 61-49 in the striking and 1 takedown. Born in 1997, by the way. Born March 21st, 1997. 1 day before me is the Smile Killer. Claudio Puelles, winner of 5 of his last 6 fights. And, that dates back to May of 2018. He hasn't fought since April of 2022. His last 3 wins are against Jordan Leavitt, and then 2 straight knee bar wins over Chris Grutzmacher and Clay Guida. His last loss was at UFC 281 when he got knocked out in the second round by Dan Hooker. That kind of makes it a little bit easier, too. I think Zayem is rightfully the favorite. I think we've seen him beat a greater level of competition. I think Puelles' loss in their last 5 fights is a more reasonable loss to have. But I think that ultimately Zayem has beaten the more impressive opponent. Jai Herbert is a very impressive win to get, for assessing Fares Zayem's level. I think that Zayem wins this fight 65 times out of 100. At -198, I'm comfortable with him. By decision, +150, I really like that. Hit it. Puelles, +164. I wish that was a little higher. So if I'm going with it, I would go Puelles by submission, +350. Next up, we are running it back with Edgar Chairez and Daniel Lacerda at flyweight.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward.
Don't do this. You cannot do this,
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
No, don't be scared, homie. Come on.
It actually deserved all 3 of those for the fact that, this is the weirdest trilogy to get. It's got to be one of the weirdest trilogies in UFC history. Lacerda, the +370 underdog. Chairez, the -485 favorite. Well, what the hell? Let's go ahead and start off with Daniel Lacerda. Daniel Lacerda is 0-4-1 in the UFC. Wait. What was I saying trilogy for? I guess the last fight, the last one that was scheduled for both of these dudes, there was it was the Lacerda having to pull out for the medical issue. So it just felt like a trilogy. Because the first fight was a premature stoppage, no contest in round 1. And then Lacerda had to hop out of the second one. Now they're running it back at UFC Mexico City. Lacerda lost his first 4 fights in the UFC. Granted, and he got finished and never made it to the 3rd round, including against Edgar Chairez in the fight that ended up in no contest. Jeff Molina, Francisco Figueiredo, Victor Altamirano, CJ Vergara, and then Edgar Chairez. Chairez, born a few months before Lacerda in 1996. Chairez started off his UFC career with a loss in the Contender Series and a loss to Tatsuro Taira by unanimous decision. He did get a knockdown in that fight. That's all I need to see. Okay? From the way that the first fight really went, from the fact that it was Lacerda who had to pull out in the second fight, to the fact that, Chairez has a much more impressive, more recent loss. Lacerda has had at least his chance, not even to show that he's on the level of the Molinas or anything, or the Vergaras. but just to show that you can get one every once in a while and find the way to make it work. But the fact that Chairez was able to knock down Tatsuro Taira, one of the real rising stars of this flyweight division, that's all I need to see. I think that you go in this situation, just Chairez inside the distance, because I think he wins this fight about 80 to 85 times out of 100. I don't see why that would change. It just feels like I'm supposed to think that and then go the opposite way because it seems too easy. But I think this is one where you steer into the skid. Chairez inside the distance, minus 280. Use that to string something together, hit it. That's where I'm going for this fight. Real simple. Next up, we've got a flyweight matchup once again between Jesus Aguilar and Mateus Mendonca. Aguilar, the plus 105 underdog. Mendonca, the minus 125 favorite. Let us start off with Jesus Aguilar, winner of 2 of his 3 fights in the UFC, counting the Contender Series. None of his fights have made it to the judges' scorecards. In the Contender Series, he got a third-round guillotine against Erison Ferreira, outstriking him and outtaking him down throughout the way, August of 2022. His loss, too, was by first-round triangle armbar to Tatsuro Taira, February of 2023. He bounced back with a brutal first-round knockout victory over Shannon Ross at UFC 290. He was also born in 1996. Mateus Mendonca, born in 1999. I didn't know they made kids that late, even though my son was born this past November. Mendonca, loser at 2 of his last 3, and it's hard to blame him for these two. Like, he wins in the Contender Series by first-round knockout. Then he loses 2 straight fights to Javid Basharat, who pieced him up 95-29, took him down 3 times to 2, and Nate Maness, who knocked him out in the first round after a flurry that ended 29-3 on the feet. I mean, when they both get, between these two guys, their losses are to Nate Maness, Javid Basharat, and Tatsuro Taira. It's really hard to, hold that too much against them. Mendonca is coming down from bantamweight, after, and Maness was his first fight at 125 pounds in the UFC. That's meaningful. But like, I'm trying to go away from, giving so much credit to guys who have only lost to good fighters. Aguilar has, been winning. I think that he bounced back really well with that knockout victory over Shannon Ross. Even though Shannon Ross is 0-4 in the UFC. And it's just that, like, it's not like Mendonca has put up an awesome fight in his 2 UFC losses, and now we've only seen him win in the Contender Series. So I don't know. I think you go Aguilar to win this fight at least 50 times out of 100. I like plus 105, and I go inside the distance for Aguilar, and that is at plus 225. I think that's a good number. Hit it. I think Aguilar will be popular in DFS this week. I think he's going to be a better value than Mendonca, just guessing, having not looked at the prices for this week. But, that's a really close matchup. And it's, again, a difference between how you value the more recent sample size of these guys' performances. Next up at bantamweight, Christian Quinones and Randy Barcelos. Randy Barcelos is the minus 175 favorite. Quinones, the plus 145 underdog. By the way, I think I have picked 1, 2, 3 Mexican fighters so far. You got to give them the edge just because of the crowd. It's going to be pretty raucous, and it takes a special kind of fighter to actually go in and be motivated by that kind of vitriol that you're going to get there in Mexico City against one of the fighters from their country. Anyway, Christian Quinones, Randy Barcelos. Barcelos is the favorite. Let's start off with Quinones. Quinones, winner of 2 of his 3 fights at the UFC level, counting the Contender Series, unanimous decision win over Zhao Long, October 2021. A first-round knockout over Khalid Taha. That's a nice win for him there. September of 2022, and then he got subbed in the first round against Kyung Ho Gong at UFC Fight Night. Marvin Vettori versus Jared Cannonier, June of 2023. Randy Barcelos is almost 10 years older. That's not great. And by the way, Christian Quinones, nicknamed the Problema. Sweet nickname. But wouldn't it be Problema? Never mind. I'm not qualified to judge that. Barcelos, has been around a lot, has fought some really good fighters, the likes of Kurt Holloway, Chris Gutierrez, who he beat both those guys. He beat Syed Nurmagomedov, beat Khalid Taha. Then, the last four of his last 5 fights have been losses against the likes of Timur Valiev, Victor Henry by decision, got knocked out in the first round by Umar Nurmagomedov, and lost his last time out, August of 2023, to Kyler Phillips. His only win in the span, after his win in November of 2020 against Khalid Taha, his only win in 4 years up to this point is Trevin Jones by unanimous decision, where he did dominate, but that was October of 2022. Yeah, this age difference is where I'm going to start to find a problem, because Kyung Ho Gong has been a really solid fighter, across this division. And I don't think that loss is enough for me to lose faith in Christian Quinones after, his level of activity, I suppose. I just think Barcelos is definitely on the trending in the very wrong direction. And I think Christian Quinones has the capability to get this win. I think Christian Quinones wins this fight 45 times out of 100. At plus 145, I'm taking him. Hit it. And, by that standard, Quinones, I'm just comfortable taking him as an underdog, because I think the split between how many of these fights he wins by decision and how many he wins by knockout, I think is too risky to be worth whatever that number is going to be. And, Barcelos, I think that if you think he wins this fight, I think he does it by by decision. That is plus 275. I think that's if he fights a very much a fight that he fought against Trevin Jones, where he just, I think either he's still just the much better fighter or Christian Quinones has passed him by. Next up, we got a lightweight matchup between Manuel Torres and Chris Duncan. Chris Duncan, the plus 160 underdog. Manuel Torres, the minus 192 favorite. Let's start with Chris Duncan. Winner of 3 in a row. After losing in the Contender Series October of 2021 by second round knockout TKO to Vyacheslav Borshev. 3 wins in a row, 1 knockout, 2 decision victories, 1 very close decision against Omar Morales. The other 2 wins were in the Contender Series against Charlie Campbell and at UFC Fight Night Aspinall versus Ty Burra by unanimous decision. Yanel Ashmuz, who he beat 85-35 on the feet with 2 takedowns. Manuel Torres will have a 2-inch reach advantage. He is also 2 years younger. Winner of all 3 fights in the UFC, including the Contender Series, by first round knockout. In the Contender Series against Colton England, against Frank Camacho, and in June of 2023 on the Vittori Cannonier card against Nicholas Mata. At these odds, I'm very comfortable. I think I even got Torres at minus 175 if you got it earlier in the week. But, if you want to go Torres by TKO knockout at minus 110, just because we've seen Duncan hurt before by a lower quality of fighter, I think that is fair. I just think that, what he's proven so far, I don't have nearly as many question marks about him as I do Chris Duncan. I think Torres wins this fight 65 to 70 times out of 100. I think Duncan is going to get hurt in this fight. And I just don't think that I think that Torres' striking is enough to keep Duncan at a distance, because I don't think Duncan is going to be able to get him down to the ground anyway. So El Loco is going to get this victory. Hit it. And take him by TKO knockout if you really want to.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
No, don't be scared, homie.
I think both these guys will be, fair numbers in DFS. I'm going to be rolling with Torres as often as I can. At women's strawweight, Yasmin Uruguay against Sam Hughes. Sam Hughes, the plus 425 underdog. Yasmin Uruguay, the minus 575 favorite. Let's start with Uruguay. Uruguay, winner of 2 of her last 3, but lost her last time out in July of last year. 2 wins in 2022 against Yasmin Lucindo. 86-66 on the striking was for Yasmin by unanimous decision. And then December of 2022 on the Thompson versus Kevin Holland card. Second round knockout victory over Estela Nunes. Then she gets stormed last time out, doesn't even land a single strike at UFC 290 and gets knocked out in the first round against Denise Gomez. By the way, Yasmin was born in 1999. She is 7 years younger than Sam Page Hughes. They have the same reach at 64 inches. After 3 losses in a row to start a UFC career to Tisha Torres, Loma Lubunme, and Luana Pinheiro, 3 tough tests in that. She has now won 3 of her last 4. A decision victory over Estela Nunes where she got outstruck, but she still got 2 takedowns, and that ended up being the difference in a majority decision fight. A 3rd round TKO with 4 takedowns against Elise Reed. And a unanimous decision April of 2023 against Jacqueline Armorim. Outstriking her 46-12. She did get taken down 2 times to 1. The fight that was actually unanimous decision loss, and it was Pierre Rodriguez outstriking Sam Hughes 83-69 with 5 takedowns. And Pierre, since that time, went on to lose to Jillian Robertson by a 2nd round armbar April of 2023. So, it's a very reasonable loss. And after a 3-fight losing streak to start a UFC career, has bounced back rather nicely. So I don't know if this number is fair. Sam Hughes.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie. Come on.
And I still think that, we've seen the kind of fighter that is Sam Hughes' ceiling. Because Estela Nunes, as much as I'd like to give a decent amount of credit to that, because she has fought a lot of tough fighters, out of 4 UFC fights, but she's 0-4 in that stretch. So, I think we've seen Sam Hughes' ceiling, and it's in those 4 UFC losses. Uruguay, when you're talking about, Denise Gomez, she's been kind of a roller coaster, but has gotten big wins, and her only losses have been to really good kickboxer, or really just fighters that are really good at controlling fights, like Loma Lubunme and Angela Hill. Those are the losses. So I think it's reasonable for Uruguay to be the favorite. I think she wins this fight 65 to 70 times out of 100. And how? Probably by decision. Sam Hughes might be good for 1 or 2 takedowns, even in a fight where she gets controlled on the feet, and it still ends up being a decision for her opponent. So I don't know. Uruguay by decision, minus 120. I think that's a good number. I think that's very reasonable. If you're going Sam Hughes, just go Sam Hughes plus 425. And I don't think that's a crazy number, especially at women's strawweight, when we've seen such, mixed results from these 2 fighters. But, I think if you're going to put heavier money on something, you go with Uruguay, because I think her ceiling's higher. We can't judge her as much from her 1 loss as the number of Sam Hughes losses. And I think she's got more upward mobility. My God, she was born in 1999. She's got plenty of room for improvement. And I'm sure that has happened, and has continued to happen in between each of her fights. Next up, we got a bantamweight matchup between Raul Rosas Jr. and Ricky Turcios. Turcios, the Ultimate Fighter winner. The guy who faced off against former Tap That guest Brady Highstand in the Ultimate Fighter finale. He is the plus 180 underdog. Raul Rosas Jr., the minus 218 favorite. Let's start off with Ricky Turcios. All right. Ricky Turcios had that fight with Boston Salmon in the Contender Series where he lost a fight that, if you looked at it on paper, you'd think he would have won by unanimous decision, outstriking Salmon 110-61. He's won 2 of his last 3. The Ultimate Fighter finale, of which, of course, he had to win several fights to make it to, by split decision over Brady Highstand. He outstruck him 100-66, got a knockdown, got taken down 6 times to 2. Then he loses by unanimous decision to Ayman Zahabi, got outstruck 54-27. And against Kevin Natividad, the last time out, November of 2022, he He lands 68 to 41 strikes for Natividad. He got knocked down once and got taken down 7 times wins the split decision. Raul Rosas Jr. will be at a 4-inch reach disadvantage. This guy, El Nino Problema, is very young. And, Tercios, he was born in 1993. He's not, he's not past any plateau by any means. But Raul Rosas Jr., winner of 3 of his 4 UFC fights, in the Contender Series against Mando Gutierrez, a first-round sub against Jay Perrin, and a first-round knockout TKO against Terrence Mitchell. UFC Fight Night crossover Shevchenko 2. His loss in between then was by unanimous decision to Christian Rodriguez, April of 2023. I think that this fight goes the distance. I think that Ricky Tercios, even if you really believe in Raul Rosas Jr., I think that Ricky Tercios is a really durable, tough dude. He's a dog, and I think that is going to help him avoid, and his record shows that, this dude fights the kind of fight that goes the distance. So I think if you're going Raul Rosas Jr., who I think, first off, let's just settle that. If you're going Raul Rosas Jr., you go by decision, that's plus 200. Hit it. That's a great number. If you're going Tercios, you go Tercios by decision. That's plus 400. Actually, not as good of a value as I'd hoped it would be, but it's very reasonable. Hit that too. I think that, both of these guys could be useful in DFS as well. I don't think I'll end up paying any price that Raul Rosas Jr. will be put at, just because I could see him winning a statistically insignificant fight. Tercios might be worth a decent price. I think he wins this fight 40 times out of 100. I could see plus 180 being worth it. Raul Rosas Jr. is just getting better. He's a star. He's got star power. This is in Mexico, I reiterate. But, Ricky won the Ultimate Fighter, and he's coming off a win where he got taken down 7 times and still ended up winning the fight. He's good at winning fights on, with some volume and energy and pressure when they ended up being close anyway. So, I don't know, plus 180, I would hope that there'd be a little more movement on that, but I don't think that's a bad number. I certainly would rather take Ricky Tercios plus 180 than Raul Rosas Jr. minus 218. Next up, we got a lightweight matchup between Daniel Zellhuber and Francisco Prado. Hence the name of this episode, The Devil Wears Prado. Zellhuber, the minus 270 favorite. Francisco Prado, the plus 220 underdog. Let's start off with Prado. Coming off a win, he lost his UFC debut by unanimous decision to one Jamie Malarkey at UFC 284. July of 2023, bounces back with a first-round knockout victory over Otman Azatar, who had at least won 2 of his last 3, including a win over Kama Worthy by the time that he faced Francisco Prado. Prado, born in 2002 with a 69-inch reach. Zellhuber, the golden boy, 77-inch reach. He will be at an 8-inch reach advantage. He was born in 1999. He is a spring chicken himself. Winner of 3 of his last 4 fights. A Contender Series victory by unanimous decision with 115 strikes landed against Lucas Almeida. His decision loss to Trey Ogden got outstruck 71-52 at UFC Fight Night Sanhagen vs. Yadong Song. Winner at 2 in a row now. A unanimous decision where he knocks down Lando Veneta and lands 78 strikes. That was April of 2023. And then September of 2023 gets a second-round Anaconda choke over one Christos Giagos. Yeah, this is the kind of fight that if Zellhuber was a few years older, or, wasn't of a prospect level himself, but also wasn't born in the 2000s, and we've seen him, get 3 UFC wins, maybe I'd be tempted to go with Prado as the underdog. But I think that Zellhuber, I think that there could be some real moments for Francisco Prado in this fight. But I don't know. If I'm taking someone on the money line, I guess it would be Prado because of the lack of experience, the age difference between these two, the fact that Francisco Prado is, coming off of a nice win against Otman Azatar. But Zellhuber has proved too much to us already in his UFC career. He got 2 wins in 2023. So, how I think that happens, most likely, probably by decision. I think Zellhuber ends up, Zellhuber by decision is plus 175. Hit it. If you're going Prado, I don't know. I think that if you're going Prado, I think you go decision too. And just that, Prado, lands more of the strikes. I think that both of these guys are going to have their moments in this fight. And I think that if this is a fight that Prado wins, it's one where he's just, landing the better, stronger strikes against Zellhuber. Even if the numbers are kind of close, I could see him, coming out on top for that reason. So I don't know. Prado by decision plus 600. That's all right too. But I have to ride Zellhuber here. I think he wins this fight 70 times out of 100. Next up, we are at the co-main event of the evening, a featherweight matchup between Yair Rodriguez and Brian Ortega. T-City is back, and T-City is the plus 130 underdog. Yair Rodriguez, the minus 155 favorite. That's been on its way down. Yair Rodriguez, I got him at plus 160 at least earlier in the week. Let's start with T-City, all right, because it's been a saga. T-City hasn't fought since July of 2022. He has not won since October of 2020.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
Don't do this. You cannot do this,
And again, that's an exaggeration, and it's significant because, my God, 2 wins ago for him was March of 2018 against Frankie Edgar, which is crazy to me that that's now, almost 6 years ago exactly. The losses in that time, he got knocked out twice by the likes of Max Holloway and Yair Rodriguez in the first round. So they're running this back-to-back for Ortega. And then a unanimous decision loss where he got 214 strikes landed on him and an absolute battering by Alexander Volkanovski.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
Yeah, so the one win being against the Korean Zombie, October of 2020 by unanimous decision, 2 knockdowns, 127 strikes, and 3 takedowns. Born in 1991, T-City is, he's a guy that is going to feel at home in this home crowd. I don't think that it's going to be as significant an advantage for Yair Rodriguez. Ortega's been having, seemingly a great time in Mexico, in the lead up to this fight week. But that is a really rough spot for Ortega to come in on. You lose that many fights to that many world-class opponents. You just got knocked out in the first round by this guy 2 years ago. And that was your last fight. Yair Rodriguez, on the other hand, still a year younger. Still has a 2-inch reach advantage for El Pantera. He has fought 3 times, really, since Ortega has only fought 1 time in that span. 2 wins, that first-round knockout over Ortega, and a second-round submission against Josh Emmett, who recently got a huge knockout victory in this weight class. And, Yair Rodriguez, the same thing. And people will be quick to point out this week, the last time that Yair Rodriguez was in Mexico City was that eye poke finish of the fight. No contest against Jeremy Little Heathen Stevens. And Yair Rodriguez actually lost to Frankie Edgar back in 2017. But that just doesn't mean a whole lot. Yair Rodriguez got a second-round knockout against BJ Penn before that. He's also got a win against Alex Caceres, Andre Philly, Dan Hooker. That's just interesting. But, his last 2 losses, too, are to Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski. So you got to give Yair the same amount of credit for the losses that he's had, but a lot more credit for the wins that he's had, 2 out of his last 3, with 1 in 2023 at least, against a top 10, top 5 opponent in Emmett. So I don't even think this number's high enough, honestly. Like, there's a little bit of a mystique around Brian Ortega. I think that people find him to be a really interesting person. Hell, I find him to be a really interesting person. His story's interesting. He's a fun fighter to watch. He can take an unreal amount of damage. Seems like a likable dude. But my God, there is no reason to believe that T-City is going to get this win on Saturday. Yair Rodriguez wins this fight 65 to 70 times out of 100. That's the only thing that you can say from the two fighters' most recent resumes. Other than a stylistic matchup, you would never give the credit to an Ortega over Yair Rodriguez with these last 3 fights that they've each had and the similar very high-quality losses. And guess what? Stylistically, the first time they fought, Yair Rodriguez tuned him up in the first round and ended up putting him away. Something that Alexander Volkanovski did not do in 200 strikes, across the course of a main event title fight. I don't care all the things that we're going to hear in the lead up about Ortega that are different, or that he feels that he says he's in the best shape of his life. He's in a better state mentally. Maybe that's the case, but this is just too much time without a real UFC win as compared to what Yair Rodriguez has been up to.
Don't do this. You cannot do this,
So I reemphasize that point. Yair Rodriguez minus 155, hit it. And, I could see this going to decision, but Rodriguez by TKO knockout plus 180, that's fair. By decision plus 250, that's giving Ortega a little bit more credit, but that might be how a rematch kind of plays out. If I think Ortega gets a victory here, I don't know. I think if that's just a tough one, because we haven't seen Yair Rodriguez super susceptible to a submission loss. I think if you go Brian Ortega, you either go plus 130 is not a good enough number to me. But Ortega inside the distance, plus 200, maybe that's as close as I come to liking him here. By the way, Zellhuber and Yair Rodriguez, I think, are going to be options that you'll see in the variations of my DFS lineups this week. And now, folks, we are to the main event of the evening.
Break out the red panties.
We got a flyweight rematch between Brandon Moreno, ranked number 2 in the world at flyweight according to Topology.com, and Brandon Royval, ranked number 5 in the world at 125 pounds by Topology. The main event was supposed to be Brandon Moreno versus Amir Albazi. Amir Albazi, another fastly rising prospect in the UFC flyweight division. They're trying to get a fight together for him. Who knows what that might end up being. That was a much more interesting main event to me, especially in Mexico, because that would have been a monstrous win for Amir Albazi to be able to get. But that is not what it's going to be. It is a rematch here. Moreno, the minus 290 favorite. Royval, the plus 235 underdog. Let's start with Brandon Royval. 15-7 as a professional. Nickname Raw Dog. He is coming off of his title shot opportunity. December of 2023 against Alexander Pantoja. He outstruck Pantoja 111-95, got taken down 8 times to nilch, ends up losing a unanimous decision fight. Now, his last 2 losses are to Alexander Pantoja. And that dates back all the way to August of 2021. But one fight before that is where he loses by first-round knockout to Brandon Moreno. The most impressive 2 wins, I think, that Brandon Royval has in the UFC are his first 2 back in 2020 against Kai Kara-France and Tim Elliott. The 3-fight winning streak that got him the title shot against Rogerio Bontorin, Matt Schnell, and Matheus Nicolau, I think that's an impressive way to get to a title shot, but it's still not one that even makes me take you seriously fighting for the belt or fighting against a guy that used to be the champion. I think Royval will always be in that contender conversation. But I think, we've kind of seen his ceiling, at least appears to be the Brandon Morenos and the Pantosias of the world. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like Alex Perez's run to the title shot. How it was like, he's the best guy available right now in flyweight. You can get a good a level of activity out of in any given year. But it just doesn't make me think that this guy is number one in the world. Now, granted, he beat Bontorin by split decision despite getting taken down 8-0. And then he got a first-round victories over Matt Schnell and Matheus Nicolau. Two really tough flyweights, for sure. Brandon Moreno is the Assassin Baby is 1 year younger than Brandon Royval. He'll have a 2-inch reach advantage. What do you do if you're Brandon Moreno, by the way? I mean, you fight Brandon Royval in November 2020 in what was pretty much a number one contenders fight at UFC 255. Get a first-round knockout. You fight Davison Figueiredo for the title. It goes to a majority draw in an insanely close fight. You capture the title with a third-round rear naked choke. You fight the guy. How often does the guy who gets the second victory end up losing the third? But then loses by unanimous decision to Davison Figueiredo, who knocked him down 3 times at UFC 270. Then, for the interim belt, gets a third-round knockout against Kai Kara-France, July of 2022, bounces back, and in what was the 4th fight with Davison Figueiredo, outstrikes him 48-19, 3 takedowns to 1, gets a third-round knockout TKO at UFC 283, Glover Teixeira versus Jamal Hill. So, in a span of 3 years, your whole focus was fighting pretty much one dude and getting, what was a pretty decisive victory against Kai Kara-France, who is another flyweight that I love. And, it just seems like he might be like the Joseph Benavidez of this era. You can fight for the title a lot of times against a lot of different guys, and it still feels like you might not capture it. That's also kind of a Royval feeling. But Brandon Moreno last time out, it was like after that a whole, 4 fights against Figueiredo and ending that saga, and then you lose to a guy who was the underdog in Alexander Pantoja. You outstrike him 147-129, but you get knocked down in the process and taken down 6-2 and are out to a split decision loss. It's been quite a story for Brandon Moreno. And at flyweight right now, it's so weird, because I love Alexander Pantoja. It's just like weird after that many fights between Moreno and Figueiredo that now it's like Pantoja is the one that seems like he can't be stopped. Even though people don't enjoy talking about him as much. Brandon Moreno has done a lot more impressive things than Brandon Royval. That's what it comes down to. I don't see, any reason that the win-loss column result would be any different this time around between Moreno and Royval. Royval just has his limits, and Moreno is a really well-rounded, scrappy fighter. I think he just beats Royval in, every category that is going to matter in another fight between them. I think Royval has the ceiling of, number 2 or 3 in the world. Moreno's ceiling is a champion. It doesn't mean that he might not lose to a guy, but that guy who beats him is also wearing a championship belt. That's as simple as, Moreno has only lost to champions. And Royval, it's actually been the same thing. But he hasn't beaten a champion, and I think as simple as that might sound, I think that it does tell the story of this fight. I think that Brandon Moreno wins this fight 70, maybe even 75 times out of 100. Minus 290, I'm seeing, a lot of people using this in parlays this week. I agree. I think Moreno is going to be a very popular option in DFS. I agree with that too. If Brandon Royval is really cheap in DFS, I could see maybe giving that a shot. But I don't think he's going to be as cheap as I would want to, as it would need to be appealing for me, given some of the other options on this card that I think are going to be really cheap. So go Moreno minus 290. I think that, I think that the most reasonable result is I don't know, in a close decision where there's going to be a lot of scrambles, takedowns, maybe even like, a combined, 200 combined, 250 strikes between these guys, at least. I could see that. This fight going to decision is plus 100. It's going to be 5 rounds. I think like the more likely of the two to win this fight, inside the distance, I guess it would probably be Moreno. And that's really the problem is I don't see what the path to victory is for Brandon Royval. So I think Moreno is more likely to win the fight by decision. That's plus 140. And then inside the distance is plus 150. So the odds makers kind of agree with me on that aspect. I think both those numbers are fine, but I think you pick one of those. You string minus 290 for Moreno together to try to get with something else, another heavy favorite on this card that we like to get a better price. And I think you ride Moreno in DFS. Hit it on all counts. And folks, that is it for UFC Mexico City. This has been another episode 125 of RotoBallers official MMA podcast. Tap that. Again, this is a huge week for mixed martial arts with PFL versus Bellator, Ryzen, KSW, the UFC Fight Pass action that's going on, Karate Combat. I'm making picks for as much as I possibly can this week. Follow those picks on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube, Facebook, and Spotify. Like, subscribe, comment, leave favorable reviews, spread the word, tell your friends. And I will be in the RotoBaller MMA Discord from 4 to 5 p.m. onward throughout the night for the weekly DFS/sports betting Q&A for UFC Fight Night Mexico City. Show up. Let's talk about this card. Spring football season is coming up. We got a lot of interlude guests to that point. I'm working on some special MMA interlude episodes as well that should hopefully be coming within the next month or two. Folks, have yourselves a great week and enjoy an incredible weekend for the sport of mixed martial arts. Thanks for listening. Peace.